Disclaimer: the hosts of this podcast, Timothy Patrick and Will Foley, are by no means medical professionals. However, having lived experience with mental illness themselves, they have gained useful perspectives on common mental health issues that some of us struggle to overcome on a daily basis. By sharing their stories, they hope to create connection. By creating connection, they hope to help you find your purpose. And through purpose, we can all begin to build the foundation for positive mental health. This is Above Ground Podcast.
Are you ready to lace up your boots, throw up your horns, and jump into the pit? Then let's stomp the stigmas of mental illness. It's time for Above Ground Podcast. Now, Will Foley and Timothy Patrick.
Hey, what is up, everyone? Welcome to Above Ground Podcast. Above Ground Podcast, because you can't serve below. Episode 101 this week. Do no harm, coming up momentarily. But first, I wanted to talk to you about our good friends, Dan and Natalie at Close Knit Company. That's right. It's May. You know what May means? It's t-shirt weather. That's right. T-shirt weather. They got all sorts of cool designs to strap you in, man. So go check them out at closeknitco.com. Make sure you tell them you heard it here on Above Ground Podcast. And while you're over there checking out their awesome designs for the summertime and checking out some tequila t-shirts, because they got lots of them floating around, I see. You can check out Collabex and pick yourself up an Above Ground Podcast t-shirt or hoodie, because that's how we keep this show rolling, people. T-shirts. And we all love t-shirts. Also, wanted to talk to you about our friends, Nippertown.com. Nippertown.com is the premier online destination for the 518 in everything arts, entertainment, culture, wellness. It is your prime go-to spot to find out what is going on in the 518. If you're here visiting, summertime's coming. People are going to be coming to Saratoga Racetrack. They're going to be coming into town for you guys will be coming back to school in August. Hopefully, you know, everybody be coming back to college. Anybody coming to the 518 for the first time, man, Nippertown.com is the place to go to see who's playing, to see what shows are going on. Check out Above Ground Podcast. That's right, Above Ground Podcast streams every week on Wednesdays, everywhere you pod. But we are also on the Nippertown.com homepage and platform, and it's awesome, and I want to thank Jim. Jim's awesome. So give us some love on Nippertown. You can check out all sorts of cool stuff, man. There's other podcasts. There's a beer podcast. There's another restaurant podcast. I'm going to get some stuff together so I can tell you a little bit more about the other stuff going on over there too. But yeah, I love beer, so I listen to that podcast. It's awesome. All right. So without further ado, we are doing another interview today on this episode, Do No Harm, episode 101. And our interview today is with the director of the New York State Suicide Prevention Community and Coalition Initiatives through the Suicide Prevention Center for New York. It is Garra Lloyd-Lester, and he was awesome to talk to, man. May is Mental Health Awareness Month. I mean, obviously here on Above Ground Podcast, 365, 724 is mental health awareness every day. But, you know, these months where we got to, you know, talk about something specific, these kind of things, we should be talking about this stuff all the time. But I guess if it takes you, 30 days to think about it, and then you won't think about it again, I don't know. I think it's kind of ridiculous, but, whatever, man. That's just me. I say you think about your mental health every day, because without your mentals, you don't have your physicals either. So think about that. All right. So check it out. Garra. Later. Garra Lloyd-Lester is the director for New York State Suicide Prevention Community and Coalition Initiatives for the Suicide Prevention Center of New York. And it's awesome. I've heard so many good things about Garra over the years with my work with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention that when Kate suggested getting you on, trying to get you on, I was like, awesome. So that's why she started the introduction. So we thank you so much for being here, man.
Yes,
Thanks
thank
for the
you very much.
opportunity. Looking forward to it.
So yeah, why don't we talk about what Timmy just? Why don't we start there? I guess there's probably no better way to start than to just kind of jump in and be like, okay, well, something's happened. What do we do next? Like, what do we? Somebody's made an attempt. Somebody's, you know what I mean? Let's talk about those things. Let's just
Yeah,
go right.
and I think in the lens of trying to address stigma, it's so true. I've heard so many stories of people that have made an attempt on their own life. They survived that attempt. Maybe they're in the hospital getting medical treatment, perhaps for that attempt, and or some sort of behavioral health care, and it can feel super isolating because if you think about somebody that gets injured or gets ill and goes to the hospital, they have loved ones and family members around, will gather around, right? That isn't always the case with somebody that's experienced a suicidal crisis and made an attempt. And so the isolation that they may have felt prior to can get compounded.
Excellent. Yes, I agree with that.
And I suppose because you had already mentioned this, because Tim had started this conversation about how it's very hard to find the words to even breach the subject, let alone start a conversation about something that just happened that people are ashamed of or hold some secret bias towards or whatever. Because you find that, and I would say this for me, and I say this because, and I kind of want to come at it from this premise because I think it'll kind of get us at a good point of what Timmy mentioned is that I say that it's never an option until it becomes an option in somebody's mind. And I'm wondering how that projects into the subject of actually starting to talk about it because people don't seem to understand that because I always thought that it wasn't an option in my 20s. I said I would never do anything like that. I would never get that low. And then in your late 30s, early 40s, you start to find, yeah, you are. So it's like, how do you make that correlation and how do you start that conversation with somebody who's probably already ashamed of it themselves? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think, I know for myself, in hard topics or tough topics, whether it's about suicide or, whatever the topic might be, we can often wrestle with trying to find the right words. And not surprisingly, the right words will probably never show up. Or if we wait for those right words, we'll probably be silent for a while. So I try to tell myself, and I've heard other people share something similar is, you don't have to find the right words. You just have to be genuine and authentic and sort of lean in. If it's somebody who's in your life, like your care will show through, even if you flub up the words, right? And so I think for somebody who has made an attempt, simply by being there physically or emotionally or both, is going to speak volumes. And if you say the wrong words, you'll know it probably because their facial expressions will show it, or they'll tell you, "Hey, man, what the frig are you saying?" So, I think it's to be gentle on yourself. Don't worry about trying to find the right words. Just be there, like you would for somebody who, again, was in a car accident or had an illness.
It's a good way to look at it as try and take yourself out of that, current situation, the circumstances, and maybe kind of relate it back to if it was a car accident or somebody, was skateboarding, they broke their leg and you want to go and just say hi. Yeah.
And
because I think,
go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I say, and if you don't know what to say, is ask the person. Like, I'm nervous. I'm be honest. This is new for me. Is there anything I can do to help you? How can I support you? The person might know, they might not know, and that's cool.
That's perfect. I was actually going to say that because I've been in that situation, and I just, because I didn't know what to say, didn't know what to do, and even though we kind of in our minds, we, like you said, it when you hear it, it seems very logical and kind of simple, but when you're in these circumstances, especially if it's a close connection, there's high emotions, it's hard to just sit and almost say nothing. You want to, I don't know if it's human instinct as we want to try and help, but sometimes just being there, or even like I said, when I was in that certain situation, I said, look, I don't know what to say or what to do, but I'm here. So if you know what you need, even if you don't know what you need, I'm here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, brilliant. Yep.
So I just like to be able, I think we both like to be able to try and present our listeners with some helpful advice, some helpful tools to do in these situations that they don't really arise often, but we don't talk about them either.
Yeah, I think, to me, probably a key element to help support someone who's experienced a suicidal crisis and they went from thoughts to actions and they survived an attempt is literally just to let them know that you're there for them. Because so many people who've experiencing thoughts of suicide feel this sense of isolation, even if the evidence is there to the contrary, that, well, you've got all these friends and you got family and you got jobs and you got pets and you got this and you got that. That person experiencing those thoughts of suicide, they can get that sort of tunnel vision, and it doesn't matter what's immediately to their left or to their right. They feel isolated. And so one thing that we can do is to let them know that they're not alone. I'm here for you, right? Whatever that means.
Wow, that's very spot on, at least for me. That tunnel vision, very yes.
Yeah, and I definitely understand that, because obviously, if you spend enough time with certain people, you would know.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have any experience with mental health crises of any sort, you will know there's certain things to look out for and things.
Mm-hmm.
Also, and you can trust your gut a lot of times that they're correct. But could you go over some of those things that maybe we could be looking out for?
Yeah,
Is there something specific besides the people give their things away, or they start, the conversation really revolves around, what if I'm not here, or if I'm gone, but is there, like,
from a higher level of like concrete examples, if there's a change in that person's sort of baseline, right? So now some of this supposes that I know the person, so I would know if there's a change. But if over a couple weeks period of time, something seems off, right? And one of you mentioned, trust your gut, trust your instinct. The beauty of the work that I'm privileged to be able to do is you don't have to be a clinician to figure this stuff out. You just, if your Spidey sense starts tingling, then, I probably hope I don't get sued by Marvel or whatever, but
we
not
talk about Batman all the time.
We're not that popular anyways.
But I think, give yourself permission to be human, right? We're all emotional creatures. We can all read people to a certain extent and pick up if somebody's not doing well. And again, we usually will frame it, is that over a period of time? But then, so some people wonder, well, what about a stranger or an acquaintance, somebody I don't know that well? Like, could I help somebody in that situation? And I think the short answer is, yeah, you could. You don't need to know somebody to recognize if somebody's in distress. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to stop and go up to everybody on the street that seems a little off. And, there's a lot of stuff that gets packed into that. But a message that's really important to me is don't ever underestimate the power and the impact you can have on somebody's life just by showing you care, just by taking an interest. It could be a literal game changer for that person. Might not have anything to do with suicide at all whatsoever, but just to simply show that you care can be huge, right?
Sure, that's good for the mental health, man. And that's what it's all comes really down to for us, is that it's all mental health, no matter what it is, because it all kind of correlates to everything.
Yeah. It took me, and I have to remind myself, because I use the terms interchangeably, mental health and mental illness or whatnot. We all have mental health. Everybody has mental health. not everybody has mental illness. And so just like we all have physical health, some of us have been fortunate not to have had physical illness. And so I think, trying to think about how do we take care of our physical health in the same light of how do we take care of our mental health. And, so I think that can be important sometimes just as a reminder.
For sure. I think
There's
Will's
your spectrum to me.
I was just going to say, I think Will's with me, but I came up with this thing, Pieces to Wellness. It's a little design that I created, but I truly believe that if we look at, it's a spectrum, mental wellness, mental health is a spectrum. On one side is wellness, on one side is illness. And there's certain things that, can make somebody more susceptible to either side. So these are the things that, again, I more of in the prevention side of things that we can, be mindful of and try to, work out some things to become a daily habit in our lives.
Absolutely. It takes work.
I want to go back real quick to kind of what Will was talking about, to as far as what to say or how to act in these certain situations or what to pick up on, I guess he was kind of saying. I don't know how you feel, but I feel like there also is some, I don't know if I want to put accountability, liability on the actual individual to speak up, to have somebody that they're close with, a struggle buddy perhaps, and be able to say, hey, I'm not really doing okay today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think that makes it that much more real. It's one thing if I suspect that a loved one might be struggling to the point of thinking about suicide, but until it's spoken, until it's out there, it's sort of, well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But once, if we've clarified that, yeah, that my friend, my one, whatever, is thinking about suicide, that makes it that much more real. And I think most people are probably going to have a sense of responsibility and accountability. Now we know what we're talking about here, and what does that mean? Like, is it my job now to keep that person safe or to keep that person from acting on their thoughts? So I can absolutely see having people in my own life who've, experienced thoughts of suicide. That's a lot to carry, for sure. And so making peace with that, you can't unknow that. Once somebody's said, yeah, I'm having thoughts of suicide, that's out there. Like, you can't go back in time. So that's on some level always going to be there. It might diminish if the person gets the help that they need over time and they're in a better place. And that's the hope, obviously. But a lot of that's going to be relational too. Like, is this somebody at work or is this a family member,
Sure. Agree. Yep.
Together, Timmy and I have both, visited people in crisis, had crises of our own. And knowing that somebody is just there sometimes is good, but when does that, is it better just to come right out and ask people if they're thinking about hurting themselves? Because that's the way we're taught, is that you just ask the question. Are you really, is there a plan? Is there some sort of, do you have the way?
Are you safe? Maybe,
Yeah. Is there?
That's a great question. That's the question, right? So, I think ultimately there's got to be context. So I teach suicide prevention. That doesn't mean that I go up to people in the grocery store and start asking people randomly. There's going to be a reason, right?
Right.
And so if you're worried and you're concerned and you're not sure if those worries and concerns are connected to suicide, because they might not be, that might be like the farthest thing from what's going on in that person. The only way to find out is to ask, and to ask directly. And I get why, even as a caring person, you might be hesitant to do that. It might feel awkward. You might be thinking, well, what if they say no? Because that would be really weird too, right? But what's the worst that can happen? The worst that can happen is, yeah, it's a little bit awkward. Okay, I'll give you that. But what's the alternative? Is that we didn't ask the question, and that person needed us to ask the question. Like, they were back of their mind. It was like, if just one person notices that life sort of sucks right now and ask that question. That'll be my side. So that can be the way people think sometimes, is I just need, I don't have the ability to reach out myself. I need someone to ask me. And then, asking directly,
I think asking directly kind of provides a shock to the system too, to people.
It puts language.
Because most people, right. And most people don't expect you just to be like, hey, you're thinking about harming yourself. You know what I mean? Yeah. Most people don't ask those. I mean, I've been fortunate enough that I ask those questions, and I'm usually pretty good at getting answers out of people, and you can generally tell.
Mm-hmm.
You just have to realize when to escalate it as to when to kind of guard it, maybe as much. Because I think part of it is that I don't think we want that. I don't think we want that failure to not recognize or to have something happen and hold ourselves personally responsible that we missed something, especially with the training we got. So I think there's part of that fear that's in there, even though you have to do something. Because I feel that we have a mandate on our birth certificates now to help someone else because people have helped us. That's just the way it feels to me. So it's natural, but it's taxing and tiring.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And it's, I think like knowing what that, it's okay to ask the question and all that good things, and knowing what to look for is all great, but we're also human, right? And we're going to have down days. We're going to miss stuff, right? Yeah. Or we're going to have our own biases. There's been a couple of people in my life, one personally and one professionally, where I was having conversations and interactions with them. And everything that I was hearing and, some things that were going on in both of their respective lives were all the things that I teach all the time, but it never dawned on me that, wow, wait, this is like, this could be about suicide. And so I had this tunnel vision myself in terms of, well, no, not these individuals, but then I gave myself permission to say, wait a minute, stop and hit the pause button here. And I did. And I asked both of those individuals. One of them was like, no. And I believed him. The other one was like, well, actually, Garra, I had been. And it was like a aha moment of all aha moments. Like, but my reason for sharing that is we're human. We're susceptible to our own biases, so we have to be gentle with ourselves. I think we want to be in tune, but, unfortunately, there could be times where we just, things could pop up and we just don't make that connection. Right. So we have to be aware of that. And that's scary.
Yeah. It comes with a lot of weight, man. There's a lot of weight attached to that.
For sure.
That's popped up quite a bit in the past few weeks for me. That whole, I'm only human type thing is, so I'm hearing it. I'm hearing it. What, I don't know. We usually talk, before we get into the conversation, we talk about a little bit of what it is that you do in your work. I don't know if that's something that you want to bring up, or how long have you been?
Give us a little discography.
Let's see. In another lifetime, I actually worked in the developmental disabilities field down in the Catskills for 16 years. So that's where I started in my career trajectory. I've worked in child welfare and mental health. Prior to this job, I worked in county government, county mental health for the better part of 10 years. And that's where I really first started getting interested more and more into suicide prevention. I actually had a colleague who lost her adult daughter who was a physician to suicide. And it was one of the first real exposures as an adult to loss. And so my friend Jeanette became actively involved in AFSP after that, as so many loss survivors do. And then it progressed to really being passionate and called to suicide prevention. So in my current job now, a lot of what I'm fortunate to be able to do is to work with local suicide prevention coalitions on the county level, try to give them the support, the tools, the resources to address the burden of suicide on the local level, because that's where the work really happens, is on boots on the ground kind of a thing. And so, it might be providing training, it might be providing tools and resources, that kind of work. And then I'm also fortunate to do some state level stuff, working with veterans and first responders, looking at the intersection of suicide prevention with those disciplines, doing post-vention work. So it's really amazing, because again, you get to meet just fantastic people, very selfless, very passionate about the topic, and who want to help and who want to do stuff. So
wow, that's great. You must have some pretty intense stories to share.
Yeah, I mean, it can be sad work for sure. I mean, people will call our agency, and I'm fortunate. Again, a lot of my work is statewide. Colleagues' work is statewide, so we get to meet people from around the state, and so much of this work is based on relationships. And so people will call and say, "Hey, there was just a suicide in this community," and they're looking for support, they're looking for help. So of course, that part of it is sad, right? But I've also, and I know colleagues have heard stories where, we facilitated training of some sort. We facilitated content on how to help somebody, right? Or how to ask the question. And I've had on multiple occasions, people reach out afterwards and saying, "Hey, Garra, I just want to let you know, I had a chance to use this skill set."
Awesome.
And yeah, it really is. And I think that certainly helps to keep me grounded. Unfortunately, people continue to die by suicide, and people continue to make attempts, but there's a lot of people that have thoughts of suicide that don't. And so it's having those conversations, like what helped you, what didn't help you,
Awesome. Yeah, that's what we would love, to be able to be in contact with some of them, just to, that's the thing. It's like, these are tough topics, but that kind of information can't, you can't purchase this stuff. This is real, this is the real deal. And like, it's priceless is what I'm trying to say, I guess. So to be able to interact with those different people and get that kind of information is like, that's awesome. That's very awesome.
Yeah. It's so much of this work, if I had to encapsulate it, is about hope, either not having any or the fact that it exists, and then some continuum, right? And it's amazing hearing the stories of people who were like back up against the wall and just felt like they had no way out, and then finding a way out, right? Whatever that is, whatever that looks like, and not that it's always a straight line or whatever, but to me, that's what keeps me going, is to hear those stories and to know that if it can happen to these individuals, then it might be able to happen for others, right?
Well said. We could say the same thing. That's
what we live for.
Yeah, Will's our ambassador of hope.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. I think that's like, that should be a thing. Right?
I think we should all be ambassadors of hope, to be honest with you. Yeah. I think anybody doing this could be an ambassador of hope. We just slapped it on there.
Now, Gary, you had mentioned about certain trainings. Is that like open to public, or is that specifically designed for, do you go for like jobs? Do you do anything like that for big companies with a lot of employees?
So everything these days is prefaced, PC, pre-COVID. So a lot of the stuff that we did was in person.
You did Assist, right? Is that yours?
We do Assist and Safe Talk. They're from the same organization.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, those can only be done in person. There's some practical things that just, it wouldn't be emotionally safe, especially. But right, so we would do those types of workshops for basically anybody. So, for example, the New York State Bridge Authority, a number of years ago, the maintenance workers, the men and women who are up there taking care of the Rip Van Winkle and the Mid Hudson bridges. Unfortunately, obviously, that's where many people thinking about suicide go to. And who better to know when somebody might be stressed when you see a car pull up or somebody walking the walkway and pacing back and forth. So, at one point we trained all of the bridge workers in Safe Talk.
Awesome.
Is,
that's great.
Intended for anyone.
Yeah, no, that's great. I'm just curious, again, asking questions that what, basically on what level or like, where can we start? Like what do you, what, in your opinion, like, what do you think we could be doing that we aren't doing maybe?
So from a pure training perspective, the analogy we make often is like CPR and first aid, right? I mean, many people get trained in that. And it's one of those things that you hope you never need to use. But if you ever find yourself in that position, most people would probably feel confident that they could remember what it was that they learned and probably render some practical assistance until somebody else gets there. So in that respect, anyone and everyone should be trained in first aid. Most people.
Mental health first aid. Mental health first aid was the best 8 hours I ever spent.
Right. So it's the same idea with suicide prevention. And then we do get a little bit more nuanced. So for example, people who are clinicians might not need that basic stuff. They probably already have that foundation. So there's other tools and strategies we might give to them in terms of how to help somebody develop a safety plan or lethal means safety or whatever it might be. So that might be a little bit more tailored, I guess. But and then AFSP has Talk Saves Lives, and that's more sort of education and awareness.
Yeah, which I'm trained.
Talks a little bit in more involved. So on some level, I think it's one of those situations where if people are interested and they feel like their personal and professional life could benefit from that skill set, we'd love to be able to bring it to them.
I'd love to be assist trained. That's the one thing I've not been able to do is Safe Talk and assist, but we've got a lot of, it appears that AFSP has a lot of people that are assist trained, I think.
Yeah. Yep.
But I would love to do it since I'm not part of it now. I mean, I'm still a volunteer and stuff, but I would love to do it because I would love to have that training.
Once things open back up, hopefully sometime this year.
Yeah, we'll see.
Right. We're hopeful that we will be able to help support some of that train the trainer stuff and when people are hungry for it, for sure.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on bringing some of that training education into the school system?
Yeah. So I think, again, youth, suicide's the second leading cause of death in 10 to 24-year-olds. So,
right.
And so it's really important, especially that the adults in a young person's lives have the skills and the competencies. I have a colleague who her primary focus at the center is working with schools, and she's developed some wonderful curricula and training that speak the language of schools to help the adults know, like, what's their role. It's limited, right? But it's super crucial.
Sure.
It's not about teaching, now having teachers are asked to do so much, right? We don't want them to feel like they have to be all things to all people, but they do have an important role. So, it's helping teachers and bus drivers and food service people know, like, what's their role, right? Because they're the eyes and the ears of the school. They know when kids aren't doing good, right? So we try to empower them. In terms of how to help a student that might be struggling and get them connected to those more formal resources.
Nice. I like it.
Yeah, that's great. And now it's a state office, correct? Or is it?
So the suicide prevention office is housed under the New York State Office of Mental Health. Okay. State office.
Yeah.
The prevention center is actually, our funding comes from the state, but so I'm not a state employee though. Okay. The work that we do dovetails and is in support of the state plan. And it's all coordinated and collaborated. So there's, a lot of my work is more in the public health world, but a lot of work that we do also happens in the clinical world and supporting healthcare systems, looking at colleges and universities. And it's really trying to take an across the lifespan and across systems approach, because it can't just be a mental health thing, because that, first off, not everybody thinking about suicide has a mental illness.
Right.
They may have reached their own personal breaking point for whatever life is throwing at them. And so they're people that aren't going to be captured by the mental health system. And then people that do have a mental health diagnosis, not everybody's in treatment, right? So
right.
We really have to expand our way of thinking in terms of who the helpers can be.
Yeah, we agree. That's why I think it's important to offer different things and different paths for people to get in. Because that was part of the reason why I got my peer support specialist certificate. Because I think that's a good way to in to something. I don't know what yet, but something.
Well, no, and that's, for so long in this work, it was all about, well, how can we help people that have been struggling? But we never asked people who had been struggling, like, what can you do?
Bingo.
And it's really, it's taken a while, and there is some dynamic tension between, the people who have a lot of letters after their names and who are really, go to school for this and are really smart and do research and know the science behind it. And then there's people with, quote, lived experience, which is typically the term. And, how do we take those lessons learned, and because they're not mutually exclusive, right? They have to be integrated. They have to be melded together.
Yeah, I agree. Wow, that was awesome.
Yeah, I agree too. I wonder if do you think it's possible to integrate the two? Because I feel like there's I don't know if I would call it like a stigma on like peer support, or maybe like this we'll just call it a stigma. So
yeah, I mean, I tend to be a glass half full kind of a person. So in answer to your question, do I think there can be? Yeah, I think it's not going to be a linear path. And there's a listserv with, people who are in this field from a number of different vantage points. And some of the conversations that happen on that listserv are pretty existential and whatnot. And they address some of that. And there's some, and I think rightfully so, there's some tension there around people who want to help but don't have that personal experience, and people who want to help and have that personal experience. And so it's interesting to see the different viewpoints go back and forth. And I think ultimately we need to have those honest, hard conversations, and not gloss over them and pretend they don't exist, if we're going to integrate, if we're going to find a way to use both the science and people's experiences to make a difference.
Agree. I mean,
I think you need to, because I don't think that the science says it all, because it's not really like a strictly science thing. There's a lot of emotion that plays. I mean, there's a lot of emotional baggage tied to attempts, tied to, deaths, tied to just getting to that point. So you got to look at it from some sort of emotional standpoint, I would think, from like some sort of empathetic side.
Well, and it's about people, right? And so
right.
I think the science absolutely has a place, and because some people respond better to some things than others, and so but it's not an all or nothing, I think. And so we're in a better place than we were 10 or 15 years ago. 10 or 15 years ago, we weren't really talking to people who had survived an attempt to find out what was that like, and what worked and what didn't work, kind of a thing. So we're definitely getting better and making progress.
That's what we need.
That's good. Yes, that's good.
We need progress. And I think that the work you're doing is super important. And I think that, like, just like AFSP and just like us, I think as we all do this more and more, and we break down more stigma barriers, I think because the conversation becomes more normalized, I think we'll be in a better place. But it's obviously been very slow. I mean, I grew up in a family of mental illness. My mother has schizoaffective disorder, and she's hospitalized currently right now, actually. And it's like there's a lot of baggage that goes with that throughout life, no matter what. So
Mhm.
it's like, then you throw suicide on top of that. That's a whole there's there's a lot of weight to that, familial wise and stuff.
Oh yeah.
Uh,
Well, and when I was growing up, you literally, like nobody talked about suicide. Maybe if a celebrity died by suicide, and even then, in those instances, it wasn't talked about safely. It was more sensationalized, right?
sure. Yeah.
And I think, in one respect, um, it is being talked about a lot more. Like kids in particular, they don't have a problem talking about it.
No, they don't.
Anything, they've gone to the other extreme, and maybe it's almost out there where it's not always talked about in a safe fashion. So that whole idea of, again, not sensationalizing it, and the work that you all are doing right now, like, in this is a great example of, it's not whether we should talk about suicide, it's how we should talk about it. Right.
Right. Yeah, that's all it is.
Yeah.
It's just the linguistics. It's the language of it, and as opposed to choosing, to say something else rather than to say what you would think it would be,
Yep.
or what the odd is. That's pretty.
Yeah,
That's awesome. Very awesome, man. Yeah, thank you very much for doing this, because there's a lot wrapped up in that cake right there. There is, man.
there is. And I agree. I think with, like somebody like yourself with your experience and, doing what you have been doing for all those years and all that wisdom that you've collected, is to not use that is a tragedy.
Yeah. I can't see myself not being involved in this work in some way, shape, form, or another. It's not just a job, right? I mean, it is a calling, and so I think, for people who are involved in this work, you can see that it's really, something that they're passionate about. And it makes a difference. One of the hardest things is, from a research perspective, it's hard to measure sometimes the outcome, and people want to see, what's the quantitative data,
Right.
and rightfully so. I mean, there's lots of things we should look to see about the effectiveness. And it's hard sometimes for all of our efforts to say, is a media campaign making a difference in the burden of suicide? It's difficult to measure a true connection. But I think ultimately, at the end of the day, it's not going to be any one thing or any one effort that is going to reduce the burden. It's really, when we think about what helped to reduce smoking, right? It was a number of different efforts and initiatives. It was public education and awareness. It was, people talking about their own experience with emphysema or whatever it was, right? It was a true public health effort. And that's what we need to continue to keep in mind with suicide, is it really has to be a public health, all hands on deck approach.
Have you seen some of that dramatically increase, just because you've been in this, the pool for many years? Have you seen some positive differences?
Yeah, I think a refinement in messaging, because the messaging that we do is important, right? So again, not whether we should talk about suicide, but how we talk about it. So we've gotten a better understanding, and again, informed by people, either loss survivors or attempt survivors, right, have really helped to inform messages. Certainly clinical tools have gotten more advanced and more sophisticated. Having peer recovery, right, having attempt survivor groups, and having some structure and support for those, it is a huge example of progress in the field. So I think we're absolutely making progress. And we've seen in other countries, the numbers have, in some countries, begun to come down slightly. And so, that tells me that we can move the needle in that direction, right? And so it's it's going to take time, but again, I think we have the ability to make those changes. I think one of the biggest things that I've heard from many people who consider themselves to be attempt survivor is partly not just looking at suicide prevention as preventing the act of suicide, but looking at a life worth living, right? And really saying, what is a life worth living? So it can't just be not killing oneself. I mean, yeah, that's the ultimate goal, but
it's a pretty cynical view. That would
right.
be a pretty cynical view.
Yeah. And that to me is so important, is what is a life worth living, right? And that's going to look different for me or for you or for everybody else. But if that's part of the starting point, to me, that's really powerful. Is suicide prevention can't just be about stopping that act from happening. It's got to be so much more than that.
Nice. Do you think that there's something that that there, like, let's say like today we're doing that we think is helping suicide prevention, and we're doing it as a positive with good intent, but do you think that there's something that is having the opposite effect? Is there anything that we're doing that may be hurting it?
I'm sure there are examples, on maybe social media. So, and I'm making generalizations, that while they might be well-intentioned, like you said, aren't safe or aren't supportive. Mainstream media, right? What's the topic du jour? Whatever it might be. And so the good news is, whether it be substance abuse or suicide or sexual abuse or whatever the topic is, raising awareness about those things is good. And using media or art as an art form, generally speaking, is good. But then there can also be a tipping point where the messages that are involved, in essence, might do more harm than good, right? And so another basic premise from our work is do no harm, right? And that's a guiding principle. Is the work that we're doing helpful, and is it coming from a place of doing no harm? And so we have those conversations all the time, because the last thing you want to do, obviously, in this space is even unintentionally,
Sure,
with critical thought, is to cause harm to someone.
Good.
As we know, one of the great myths is that by saying something about suicide, that you put the idea into someone's head. And I wanted to make sure that we just called that out.
Sure.
Real quick.
Yeah, I mean,
it's a myth that someone who's thinking about it has already been thinking about it. There's not.
Right. Yeah, and there's, a lot of times when I talk with people, and if I have the opportunity to do training, sometimes it'll come up as like, okay, if we're all caring people, we would probably all want to do good by somebody. And especially if we thought they were struggling with suicide. And then sometimes that'll be the way to then introduce, so what might get in our way? Well, it's some of those myths that might get in our way. And that's probably one of the biggest myths, is that by talking about it, we're going to give somebody the idea. And in fact, that is such a common myth that there's at least a one-page research paper, or not research paper, but literature review that refutes that myth, because it's so common. And, I just break it down that as human beings, we're just not that powerful, right?
Right.
We just, if we had the ability to do that, my kids' rooms would have been spotless.
Right.
But right. Well, to your point, the person, if they were thinking about it, they were already thinking about it before we brought it up. And in fact, most people that have been asked that question, if they were thinking about it, have shared something to the effect of what a relief it was. Somebody finally got it. Somebody recognized that life sucked right now, or has sucked for a while. And that's why we tell, oftentimes after Robin Williams died, or after Chris Cornell, or just, we talked about if you're struggling, call the 1-800 number, which is great.
Yeah.
Empower people to reach out, but it's equally important that we empower everybody else to extend your hand. Like if you're worried about somebody, you reach out, right?
Right.
You ask the question, you ask, because although it doesn't make sense on some level, for many people struggling with thoughts of suicide, they might even know, there's a part of them that might know that they don't want to die, but they just don't have it in them to take that next step and to ask for help. So that's why it's really important to ask that question. It shows that you care, right? It shows that you want to be able to help that person, that you've noticed something different. So don't, for people that are concerned that you're going to give them the idea, it's not going to happen. In fact, if they are thinking about it, it's probably going to be a relief, and it's going to help to reduce the anxiety and the stress that they've been feeling.
Excellent. Busted myths over here.
That's right. That's what we do, man. Busting myths, busting stigma. That's what we do here.
Is there another myth that pops up that you think we can?
There are some myths, like, so if somebody was really serious about suicide, they wouldn't tell anyone. Sort of this idea of there's talkers and there's doers, right? And if they were really serious, they wouldn't ask for help, or they wouldn't even be hinting at it. They would just go ahead and do it. So that is a myth. And the premise is that for the vast majority of people thinking about suicide, it's not that they want to die, it's that they don't know how to go on living at that particular moment with sort of the psychic and the emotional pain they're feeling. And so we need to take any concerns or talk about suicide seriously, and not put ourselves in a position where we have to decide, well, is it serious or is it not? Get other people involved, right? I mean, how you do that's important. We don't want to just always call 911. That's not the go-to response. But it starts with, if somebody is feeling so bad that they're thinking about suicide, that's their starting point. Then we have to honor that. We have to, okay, life's pretty hard right now. So whether it's serious or not, that's not for us to decide. We just need to understand and hear them.
I like it. I like busting myths here. How about we give them one more myth? I like to do things in threes. So
yeah.
I don't know if you think it's a myth, but I feel strong. I don't like it. I don't like when people say it. I think it's totally wrong. Is when people say suicide is selfish.
Yeah, there is a blog, and I'm going to draw a blank on it, but you can, as with everything in life these days, Google it. But it was a blog posting called "Is It Selfish to Die in a Tornado?" And so if you take that same idea, suicide is a selfish act, remove suicide. What, you died in a tornado? How dare you? Right? I mean, it's the same.
Yes.
And so and when I first read that, and again, not surprisingly, that was from somebody with lived experience. It made all the sense in the world. It like really crystallized that for me, that a way to explain that. That person, you many instances, you can think about that person experiencing thoughts of suicide as being in a tornado, right? All of these thoughts and all this crap sort of swirling around, and it's a tornado is something beyond our control, right? And for the person in that moment experiencing those thoughts, it can be a sort of an emotional tornado, as it were.
And they can some beyond our control too.
I just have to ask you this, and you can feel free to not answer.
Suicidal crisis. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. Go right ahead. You were going to talk about suicidal crisis.
I mean, we use that term, right? Suicidal crisis often in this work. And, I don't know about yourself, but I don't do my most stellar thinking when I'm in crisis mode, right? I mean, sort of right. You're struggling and reaching for solutions, and you might not be clear-headed. And so why would we necessarily expect that for the person who's at that point where suicide becomes an option, that they're going to be able to see clearly, right? And so it's the same idea, I guess. right?
What were you gonna say? Well,
I was just going to ask him. So, outside of your professional experience, and feel free to decline answering this. Do you have any personal experience through this? Do you have any?
Yeah, I do. I've not talked about it often. Talked about it with some family when I was in junior college. I made a couple of aborted attempts, meaning I stopped myself. And I've, continued to have thoughts on and off. So it's and then I've got family members as well.
So it is an act of passion for you then too, man. I find that's where we all kind of come from when we come from the lived experience part. It's usually like that that history of it.
And there are people I know who, don't necessarily have that firsthand experience that share that passion equally. I think it's for a lot of people, it's sort of baked in, right, in terms of the fiber of who we are, as to why it's really important to be able to make a difference.
well said.
I like it. So usually at the end of these things, we ask 3 questions, 2 semi-serious and 1 not so serious, just to lighten up the mood a little bit. But
excellent.
I'll let Timmy start, man.
So, Garra, do you have a favorite or least favorite word?
I love the English language. I love language. A favorite or least favorite word? Probably least favorite. Most currently is the word like. Like, you know what I mean? Like, sometimes every like sentence. So pet peeve. In terms of favorite words, we don't probably have enough time. I like old words, flummoxed and, just, I don't know, odd sounding words, I guess.
All right.
That's cool. All right. So now, dog, cat, or other?
Yes.
All the above? Are you saying you own a zoo?
Dog and cat.
Okay. Yeah.
Excellent.
I like it. I find that some people get caught off guard by that question once in a while, and they're like, and then others are just like, oh, they're very, strong in their answer about what they got and who they are supporting.
Last one. If there was something that you could do without any restraints, or something that you would like to see done for mental health as a whole, what would it be?
I think it would be one of the things would be on a national or federal government level to really have it be more of a priority and not something that bubbles up when there's maybe a news story or whatnot. So, for example, one of the House of Representatives, Jamie Raskin, his adult son died by suicide right in between Christmas and New Year's.
Yeah.
And I read a tribute, if you will, that they wrote about their son, just really powerful, really moving. And it brought a lot of attention, but it was sort of just a little blip on the radar. Obviously, there were a lot of other things going on at the time in our country. But I think what I'd like to see would be a sustained conversation, right? What we're doing here today, amplified and, on all levels, not in place of other important issues like cancer or diabetes or, financial stressors. But I'd like to see it elevated so that it is part of the conversation on a regular basis, and it's given its due, I guess, and not just sort of a topic du jour kind of a thing.
Great answer.
Yeah, I love that answer. That was great. I do think that, the high profile deaths bring this super spotlight onto it for a short amount of time. And we saw that with and especially the death of Chris Cornell affected Tim and I pretty, pretty wholeheartedly, and me especially. A lot of good memories to Soundgarden and Chris Cornell and just in general, and it was like that was a heavy one. But Robin Williams, like I'm still trying to unravel that one a little bit. I have not seen the new documentary that just came out. There's one that said what he wanted, like at the end of his life, for people to know, and it's like an hour long. But do you think that there's obviously there's good and bad with the social media amplification of all this? Do you find there to be more good than bad, or do you find it to be pretty evenly split as far as just...
Yeah, I mean, my views are evolving. For the longest time, I had this sort of blanket view that social media is bad because that's all you heard was like people either doing stupid stuff or using it in a really just horrible, nasty ways. So my views have evolved that it's a tool at the end of the day. And you can use a hammer to help build things, or you can use a hammer to destroy things. And in that light, I think it's a tool. And so I think we need to frame the narrative, if you will, of how are we using it. We're never going to completely eradicate people using it in horrible ways. We just need to be louder in terms of using it in more positive, uplifting ways.
Very well said. I like it.
And a quick on top of that is to whoever that wants to be a part of social media is to be mindful of who you're following and who is around, because I think that makes it, if you unfollow all the, if I can say quote unquote assholes, and then, pay attention to more of the positive side of things, then, absolutely it can be more of a positive thing.
I can't remember who this gets attributed to, but one of the, like, I'm a collector of quotes and positive affirmations, and I like to share them. And there's one that I've seen recently. I just saw it again not too long ago. Something to the effect of, is it true? Is it necessary? And is it kind? Is sort of a guidepost of what am I going to say or what am I going to post? And to me, that's a helpful way to think about interacting, especially with social media. Is it true? Is it necessary? And is it kind?
Saturday, June 5th, it's Reverbicon 2021, noon to 7 p.m. Fun for the whole family. All ages are welcome. Check out this awesome outdoor and indoor event. It's all sponsored by Collar City Concrete, Cool River Pools, LLC, Corpse FX, Special Effects Makeup, Collar City Painting, LLC. Into the great outdoors with some live music from Joe Mansman and the Midnight Revival Band, the Peter Anello Trio, and Vumbino. Wrestlers, artists, vendors, food, drinks, summer fun. Reverbicon 2021. Broken Road Barbecue, 1544 State Route 40, Schaghticoke, New York. Saturday, June 5th, noon to 7 p.m. with an after party with Brian Kane. Come hang out with Capital Underground on Nippertown and That Buzzing 518 show. You've waited, now it's here, and it's free to the public. Reverbicon 2021, Saturday, June 5th at Broken Road Barbecue and Bar, Schaghticoke. Check in with the abovegroundpodcast.net. For more information, go to Reverbicon on Facebook.